The opinions expressed in the following program are not necessarily those of Eastlink TV, its sponsors, or partners.
Hi there, I'm Gloria McCluskey and you're watching Destination Dartmouth. My destination today is Fairbanks Centre and my guest is Bernie Hart, who is a member of the Board of Directors. Thanks, Bernie, for being here with me. We're going to have a great chat about the Shubenacadie Canal Commission this morning.
Thank you for inviting me. Looking forward to it.
Bernie, how long have you been associated? I know you're now a volunteer, but you were on the board at one time.
Yes, I've been involved in one way or another for about 30 years.
30 years. So you know everything there is to know about this place.
No, but I've just been here a long time.
Well, I mean, you must have gained a lot of knowledge.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful spot.
It really is. It really is,
I read on the website that about the waterway being one of a kind and challenging for recreation and history and nature. And it's just, we're so fortunate to have this beautiful spot right in the middle of Dartmouth.
Yes, it is in the middle of our city, and and we are very fortunate. And particularly so that at one point we might have lost it when land transfers were taking place and so on.
Yes.
And thanks to the Dartmouth City Council, we were able to retrieve it. You know.
Yeah, that was a great save.
Yes.
And Bernie, there is a commission, a board of
There is
directors.
a commission, yes. And the commission.
And they deal with the day-to-day.
Yes, yeah. They have an oversight of the overall waterway, and particularly the area here in the Fairbanks Centre, and have staff who work on their behalf, yeah.
And what is the mission statement here? Is there one?
We actually don't have a mission statement as such, but certainly the intent is that the board will oversee the waterway and promote it in any way that they can to make it more available to Nova Scotians and visitors.
So there is an act to establish the Shubenacadie Canal Commission.
There is.
And before the one that went through the legislature in the 26th of May, 1986, there was already one with the City of Dartmouth.
Dartmouth City Council began the commission, that's right, and at that point they were responsible for that part of the canal that was within the Dartmouth City boundary. And then when the province enacted the Shubenacadie Canal Act, a new commission was created and had responsibility for the oversight of the waterway along the entire route. Although you have to bear in mind that there are private lands and so on with private rights attached to those, but still the commission is there to promote the use and protection of the waterway.
So who's responsible for the locks?
The locks themselves, it varies, but from the point of view of the historic connection and preserving that historic connection, the commission has that responsibility within the purview of the province. Yeah.
So they were built. Do you remember what year they built the locks here?
Well, we had two periods of construction, and the first one began in 1826 and went through to 1831. And during that time, they built, actually at that point they were looking at about 19 locks altogether between the harbour and the Bay of Fundy. And they had built about 16 when they came to a halt because of money problems, that's right, the usual sort of thing. And so that was the first attempt. And then a second attempt began in 1854 and went through to 1861. And at that point, they constructed 9 locks and 2 marine railways.
Oh.
And then in 1861, the canal was officially opened and ran for the next 11 years.
It's fabulous when you go down to Prince Albert Road there, where all of that work is being done.
Yes.
And you look at what they did down there. It's,
yeah.
You know, it's fabulous that people back in those days with what they had to work with,
Yeah.
how bright they were and
Exactly.
how much they
Yeah.
did.
Yeah. The other thing too, Gloria, is that we have to remember that a lot of what we've inherited from the canal, we've kind of forgotten about. For instance, Lakes Banook and Micmac didn't exist before the canal. There was a stream flowing down from where Dartmouth Crossings is now, flowing down through the center of the two, where the lakes are.
And that stream is still there.
That stream is still there, and they dammed the stream at the head of Lake Banook, where Loch 1 is, very close to Banook and Micmac canoe clubs, and that backed up the water and created the two lakes. So the fact that we have a world-class canoe course here is due to the canal. Sullivan's Pond didn't exist at all, and that was dug out, and again a dam built, and that dam is kind of being shown again now with some waterworks that's going on at the south end of south end of Sullivan's Pond. So you can begin to see how that pond was created again with another dam. So we've inherited a lot from the canal work that we're kind of forgetting about.
Yeah, we don't give credit.
Don't give credit, that's right.
Because that is one of the top paddling courses in the world.
Well, that's right, exactly, yeah.
And to think that that's the way it started.
That's the way it started, that's right, yeah.
And that's something.
Yeah.
So Bernie, let's talk a bit more about what goes on here.
Yes.
You have a room in there which was rented this morning, a lot of people in there.
Yeah.
So where do you get your funding?
Well, from a number of sources, and one is from the rental of that room, and it's available to organizations and groups who want to hold meetings, the procedure for renting it and so on, and it gets quite a bit of use, and people find it a wonderful location because they can look out through the windows and see the wonderful park area. And great parking, and they can go for a walk at noontime and along the parts of the canal, so it really is a wonderful spot. And besides that, of course, we have the exhibit area adjacent to the meeting room, and there you have the story of the canal and exhibits, you know. And one of the features too that is sort of unusual is that we have a working model of a lock.
Yes.
And we use that extensively with school groups who really, once they see that, can understand and appreciate the ingenuity of a lock system, you know.
And people who come here for meetings and that have probably never been here before.
It's often the case, yes. People come in and they're quite surprised in what they see.
Yes.
And suddenly realize when they look out the windows and see the waterway that this really is a wonderful resource. I should point out too that we have on one side Halifax Harbour, which is one of the deepest harbours in the world, and the other side the mouth of the Shubenacadie River, where you have the highest tides in the world.
Yes.
So it really has the two kind of interesting features at either end. So, and I should point out that the canal itself, the man-made part of the canal, goes from the harbour through to about Lance, where Loch 9 was built. And from there on, it's the natural river that was used. They didn't have to do anything to that. The river was navigable at that point, from there out to the Bay of Fundy.
That's great. And Micmac came about the same way as Banook.
Banook and Micmac were both created by the dam that was built at the south end of Lake Banook. Yeah.
And of course there were no buildings around there then, no houses.
Very few, if there were some, but very few. And later, of course, we had the, as you will remember, Gloria, the ice houses.
I know.
And that was there because the lake was able to provide the ice that was needed. And of course, a lot of that was shipped to the south.
Well, Bernie, we're going to take a break for a few minutes and we'll be back. We're back, Bernie.
Right.
We're going to talk a bit about how the locks were built. And I'm sure you know all the history about that.
Well, if I don't, I make it up, you see. So.
Well, that's okay. Nobody will know the difference.
No. Yes, the locks here are really very interesting because we have two phases of lock building, and they're both based on the origin of the people who were involved in the building. So in the first phase, in that 1826 to 1831 period, we had the European influence, and the canal workers, certainly the lead people, were all from Europe and Scotland primarily, and Scotland and Ireland. And
yeah, because I've heard there were a lot of Irish.
A lot of Irish, yeah. And that was interesting. That was due to a strike that had been going on in Scotland, and they had to import Irish workers. And when that job ended, a lot of those workers came to Nova Scotia to work on this canal. They were brought over in a ship called the Corsair. So anyway, in that first period, we had the European influence. So the locks that were built were all of granite. And they were very large. They were 87 feet long, 22 feet wide, and they had a minimum depth of water of 8 feet. So it really were very, very large locks. Larger. We have some here that are almost that size, but none that could have the 8 foot of water.
So where did they get the granite?
The granite came from Purcell's Cove.
Oh, did it?
Yes, and so they had quarriers who would go over and quarry the stone out. They'd be brought over by boat and then brought by horse and wagon from the harbor up to the spots here, the various canal, various locations. So these locks were really interesting features, and you get a number of sort of references. For instance, on Sundays, you'd have people from Halifax coming over just to see the locks, these wonderful creations that were nowhere else in Nova Scotia, you know.
No.
So, and if you think of an 87-foot long big granite structure, it was quite a sight. So they really were the center of attraction for a period of time. So that period lasted then until, as I mentioned, from 1826 to 1831. And then, as so often happens, they ran out of money and they couldn't complete it. So those locks sat there for quite a period of time, and it wasn't until 1854 that they began again. So there was quite a hiatus there in the middle of that. When they began the second time, it was a very interesting shift. And the person who perhaps was most responsible for that shift was an engineer born in Dartmouth, and his name was Charles William Fairbanks. His dad was Charles Rufus Fairbanks, and his dad had been involved from the very beginning and was still involved when his son first began as the engineer involved.
And thus the name Fairbanks Street.
Fairbanks Street and Fairbanks Centre, that's right, exactly, yeah, well-known Dartmouth name. So when Fairbanks began, he, a very practical kind of man, and he didn't want to overbuild. He felt that looking at the existing structures that had been put there in the 1826 period, that this was overbuilt, was too big. And he decided to look around, and rather than looking at the European example, he looked at the States. And he was particularly enamored of what he saw in New Jersey, what was the Morris Canal. And he could see that what they were doing there could be adapted in Dartmouth very easily, or in Nova Scotia very easily. And so he brought back the plans and the idea and the approach that the Americans had been using there. Instead of the 87-foot lock, he reduced it to 67 feet.
And it was still granite?
No, at this point, he decided that if he could use the existing granite wall, he would use it, or rebuild it if he had to. But that where it wasn't practical to do that, he would use the American approach, which was a wooden wall.
Oh.
And so what he did was put in upright timbers and then plank on the outside of those timbers. And that way he could build a watertight structure for far less money, and also many fewer problems in trying to hew out the stone. You had more control over it.
And it wouldn't involve more maintenance?
It would involve a lot more maintenance over the long haul.
Yes.
But he felt that was worth it to get the locks running. And it was already working in the States. The American locks in the New Jersey Canal were built in this way. So it was, and if you look, for instance, at Lock 3, which is down below us now,
right.
One of the walls, or the walls there, are of wood.
Yes.
And that's following the American design. So it was quite interesting to see that shift over, and it really was due to Charles Williams Fairbanks' ingenuity.
So who operated the locks?
When the locks were functioning and the canal opened for business in 1861, although there was some traffic happening on it as early as 1854.
That must have been amazing to see.
Oh yeah,
those locks open and
see the locks
boats
open and
going
close
through.
and so on. But in the first operating period, the lock keeper, there were 3 lock keepers, and the lock keeper that looked after the boats from the harbor up to Portobello or this side of Waverley was a man named Henry Finley. And it's a name that we know in Dartmouth quite well
right.
from other things that are left in that family, named after that family. But in any case, Henry looked after the boats coming from the harbor up. And he would go aboard the boats and give the instructions and so on as to how to get them through the
right.
locks. And he worked them up that way.
Did he really?
Yeah.
And he has a diary. He kept a diary.
He kept a diary or a log, that's right. We have that.
Right.
And it gives us a great deal of information about what was going on in the canal and who was operating and so on, yeah.
How big was there a size that the boats had to be?
Yes, it couldn't be, the lock itself, some of the locks were as low as, it was as narrow as or as long rather, 67 feet and 17.5 feet wide. So the barge or the boat had to fit within that. And in fact, the very first steamer they were using on the waterway was named Avery, after a Dr. Avery who was at Dalhousie and was the president of the first canal company. So it was named after him. And Dr. Avery, the Avery was really, it had paddle wheels on either side.
Oh, did it?
And it could barely get into the lock.
I was going to
so
say.
it had a real problem. So they had to get rid of that and bring in another type of tug. Yeah.
So what would they be hauling?
Yeah, a lot of this was bringing material down from the interior of the province that could be used in Halifax. So you had lumber, of course, timber, lumber, and wood of all sorts.
Bricks?
Now bricks coming down from Lance, yeah, a lot of bricks coming down from Lance. Then they had gypsum, for instance, and rock for building and that sort of thing. So all of the materials that you could find naturally in the interior of the province were brought down. Going the other way, you had the opposite sort of thing. You had the supplies being taken up that you couldn't get naturally.
Yeah, here.
Yeah. So they, for instance, when the gold mines were being developed in Waverley, they took a lot of the material up there for the mine, the shafts, that sort of thing, and then they took out a lot of the ore and the early years to the refining. And the refining was done downtown near the harbor. So that was quite a heavy...
They didn't have a passenger boat at all, traveling.
Well, they didn't as such, but they did carry passengers. Yeah, there was a fee for passengers and so on. And they would often travel not on the barge, but rather on the steamboat that was carrying them up and down. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
And it must have been really exciting to see those boats coming up through that narrow passage.
Yes,
And
yes.
they had to be good.
Although, you know, what's really frustrating, Gloria, is that even though we know that must have been exciting and so on, we have so few descriptions and so few records. We do have the log, thank goodness, that Henry Fenton left. But as far as, we really haven't got a single photograph or painting of a boat on the canal when it was in operation.
What a shame. We're going to take a break now, Bernie, and we'll be back. Welcome back to Destination Dartmouth and my guest, Bernie Hart. Bernie, we're going downtown Dartmouth now to talk about the Marine Railway, and a lot of work has been going on there.
Yes.
Do you want to enlighten us on that?
Yes, this is a very interesting reconstruction, and I should point out that it's the first reconstruction of a marine railway in North America.
Oh.
And although there are a number of these, no one yet has taken the opportunity to reconstruct them, although there are remnants left in other parts. So we look at this as being very important.
It is.
Yeah, and the Marine Railway's function was to carry vessels between the harbor and Sullivan's Pond, distance of about 1,250 feet, and a rise of about 55 feet in elevation.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Young people seeing that today must be, you know, wide-eyed.
Yes, I took a class from Hawthorne School over there, and they were wide-eyed. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I understand there's an animation?
There is an animation done, and this is really fascinating because a gentleman was walking by there and saw what we were doing and decided he'd like to do an animation to illustrate it, and he's done that, and it can be seen now. We have copies available, and it can be seen.
Yeah. Isn't that something?
And it makes it very clear. It's rather hard to describe sometimes, but
the
animation makes it understandable.
So they've been digging down there and uncovering. I know one time I was down in a...
Yes.
And everything was still there.
Yes, yes. This is fascinating.
Had been covered up for years.
Yes. Now, I should point out, too, that we just mentioned in the beginning of the talk that there had been 5 locks between the harbor and Sullivan's Pond, and the Marine Railway is built over the top of one of the locks, so we still have the 2 lock walls. Those lock walls go back to the late 1820s, which is really fascinating, you know.
That's probably what I saw.
Probably what you saw. That's right when you went looking down. Exactly. Yeah. So this Marine Railway then operated from water coming from Sullivan's Pond, which came down the wooden flume, and parts of the flume can now be seen on the property going into the powerhouse. The water came down the flume, dropped down an opening or a pipe down into the bottom of the chamber, which was underneath the flume, underneath the powerhouse, and came up underneath a turbine, which would then spin as the water was. It's like a lawn sprinkler where as the water came out through the apertures, it would spin, and that spinning then turned the shaft, which in turn pulled on a cable, which pulled the boat up and down the harbor. And it was a very interesting mechanism. And I should point out that, well, as I mentioned, that these were the first in British North America. We had one downtown and one out at Portobello, a marine railway out there as well.
And those would be the boats that would come through the locks?
All the boats going through the locks. They only could get to the harbor by going down that marine railway.
Right.
Or only could get to Lake William if they went up the marine railway there. Or down the marine railway.
So there's the flume house, is that what you're calling it?
We call it a flume house or a powerhouse, yes. And that because
that's
it had
the building there now?
That's the building there now, that's right, yeah.
And is that open?
Not open yet, no.
No.
We're not quite sure just how the visitor arrangements will work, but certainly it will be, there are big glass windows, and we'll be able to get a sense of just how the whole thing worked. And it really is very interesting mechanism,
And, there's so much history there.
Yes.
I can't wait until we get some interpretive signs up.
Yes, that's right.
Telling everybody, great spot for people to come to, even people coming in on cruise ships.
Yes.
To direct them up there
Yes. Yeah.
to that site.
And I think there's so much science to learn there for students as well.
Yes.
Practical science that they can actually see working. But it's so interesting how natural things could be used that way.
And it's all dug up now, as we know. They're putting in a new big line.
There is a bit more digging to do, but a lot of the digging you see there now is because of the Sawmill River opening, which people know about, going from Sullivan's Pond down to the harbor. And that's going to be interesting as well, because I think then people will get a better sense of just how the canal operated too, because the water flow from Sullivan's was the flow that drove the turbine.
Yeah, and I can remember when there was a little bridge on Portland Street.
Yes.
Where the water ran through
that's
there.
right, yeah. And that bridge was there when the canal operated. And you may remember too, Gloria, the stone walls on either side. That had been carved out. That stream had been cut out by the canal workers. The original stream went further north.
Oh, did it?
And so they had to move it down in that position. And you can see where the people worked on the sides of the
Whatever happened to that under the street now?
That's all covered over.
It's all covered.
I'm not sure just what it'll look like when the city finishes their work down on the Portland Prince Albert Exchange.
Yeah.
But that was all part of the canal. Yeah. And the boats, the rails went underneath that little bridge you referred to on Portland Street, out into the water, and then so the cradle would go out and then offload.
And that was high enough for the boats to come in under there?
Yes, yeah.
So when did the locks get built there by Banook?
The lock by Banook, the original lock, was one of the early ones that was built. In the late 1820s, the very first one. The one we see there now was the first one was changed, but some of the stone was still used, so it has to go back to the 1820s. But the major part of that work was done during the 1856 to 1862.
But then boats couldn't get through with what is there now.
Until the only thing, the lower gates are workable.
Are they?
The upper one is a dam or is a control structure. But if you took that control structure out and put lock gates in, it could work again.
It would be back the same.
But we can't do that, of course, because we want to maintain the level on Banook.
Yeah, we have to, because
the canoeing.
The world paddling course there, we have to maintain it.
Yeah.
And and Sullivan's Pond was not there.
No, there was a stream going through there. Well, it's the one that goes down to Sawmill River, but there's no pond. And it was the Irish canal workers under a man named Sullivan, who was the foreman. He was the foreman. And Sullivan directed the work, and they were able to dig out Sullivan's Pond, dig it out and make it a real pond, and then build a dam at the south end, just on where the Memorial Park is. And that dam is now sort of a bit more visible because of the work going on there with Sawmill River.
Well, and that's how we got Sullivan's Pond.
Yeah.
Bernie, this has been so interesting, but unfortunately we're running out of time. So I want to thank you again. I'm
welcome.
Sure residents will be very interested in learning what I've learned today with your great wealth of knowledge that you have here with the Shubenacadie Canal Commission.
Well,
So thanks again, Bernie.
And thank you very much for your interest.
Yeah. You've been watching Destination Dartmouth. I'm Gloria McCluskey, and my guest has